While I was away on a work trip, my parents sold my dream sports car to bankroll my sister's luxury vacation. When I returned, my mom sneered. "Thanks to your car, our daughter is living her best life." I let out a laugh and she snapped, "What's so funny?" Her grin faded when I told her that the car they'd sold was, can you imagine coming home from the biggest business trip of your life, buzzing with excitement, only to find your most prized possession, a car you sacrificed years to own, gone? And when you ask your own mother where it is, she just sneers and says, "Thanks to your car, your daughter is having the time of her life." My blood ran cold, but I forced a laugh. What she said next? Well, that's when I knew everything was about to explode. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this all played out. My name is Vanessa, I'm 28, and classic cars have been my obsession since I was a little kid. It all started when I was 7. Every Saturday, my grandpa would pick me up in his rumbling old pickup and take me to his garage, where he restored vintage cars. Those mornings were sacred. While other kids watched cartoons, I was learning to change oil, replace spark plugs, and identify engine parts. "Nessie," he'd say, using his special nickname for me, "cars aren't just machines. They have personalities, souls even." I believed him completely, especially when he showed me his prized possession. A 1969 Corvette Stingray in rally red. The curves, the engine's purr, the way light danced on its polished surface, it was magic. Someday, I whispered to myself, I'll own one exactly like this. That day, I made a promise to myself, one that would shape my future in ways I never imagined. My parents, Robert and Diana, never quite understood my unfeminine interest. "Why can't you be interested in ballet or painting?" Mom would sigh whenever I came home with grease under my fingernails. Dad just shook his head. A mix of confusion and mild disappointment. Their reaction to my sister Heather, 4 years younger, was completely different. Heather was everything I wasn't in their eyes. Delicate, traditionally feminine, interested in all the right things. When she wanted dance lessons at 6, they immediately enrolled her in the most expensive studio in town. When I asked for auto shop classes at 12, Mom scoffed. "We can't afford extracurriculars this year." This pattern continued. Heather got designer clothes, I got hand-me-downs. Heather got a sweet 16 with 50 guests. I got a cake and a card. Heather got a brand new car for graduation. I got college application fee waivers and a lecture about student loans. Don't get me wrong, I loved my sister. This wasn't her fault, but the disparity in how we were treated was impossible to ignore. I moved away for college, determined to create my own path. I worked 3 jobs while maintaining a 4.0 in finance. After graduation, I landed a position at a prestigious investment bank in Chicago. The hours were brutal, but the compensation was worth it. I lived frugally, shared an apartment, brown-bagged my lunch. Every extra dollar went into my savings, earmarked for one specific purpose: my dream car. While colleagues splurged, I kept my eyes on the prize. 5 years of 70-plus hour work weeks, minimal social life, and disciplined saving. Then finally, after years of searching online forums and auction sites, I found it. A 1969 Corvette Stingray rally red, just like Grandpa's. The owner was a collector in Wisconsin. The price? $85,000. Every single penny I had saved. The day I drove that car home was one of the most emotional of my life. Grandpa had passed 2 years earlier, but I felt his presence beside me as I cruised down the highway. "We did it, Grandpa," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. That car represented more than just a purchase. It was a testament to my hard work, my independence, and most importantly, a connection to the man who had believed in me when no one else did. My boyfriend, James, understood this perfectly. We met at a classic car show. He owned a replica 69 Stingray. Unlike my family, James got it. He understood why I'd rather spend a Saturday changing my own oil than shopping. He respected the sentimental value of my car and shared my passion for preserving automotive history. For 2 years, that car was my pride and joy. I babied it, drove it only on perfect weather days, stored it properly during Chicago's harsh winters. Never once did I imagine that the greatest threat to my beloved Corvette would come not from the elements or thieves, but from my own family. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. My boss, Veronica, wanted me in her office immediately. As I walked the long corridor, my mind raced through possible scenarios, most of them negative. Was I being let go? Had I made a mistake? Vanessa, Veronica said, her expression unreadable. How's your Japanese? I blinked. Conversational at best. 3 years in college. She nodded. Good enough. I need you in Tokyo. Patterson Financial is looking to expand their Asian portfolio, and they specifically requested someone who understands both American and Japanese business culture. This was huge. Patterson Financial was a potential client worth millions. Landing them would mean bonuses, promotions, serious career advancement. The senior partners and I agree you're the best person for this. You'll lead the presentation team. I was speechless. Senior colleagues with decades more experience were being passed over for me. This was the opportunity of a lifetime. It's a 3-week trip, Veronica continued. You leave Friday. 3 weeks away was longer than I'd ever been gone. While thrilled, my mind immediately went to my Corvette. My Chicago neighborhood had experienced a rash of car break-ins, and the thought of leaving my baby unattended made me nervous. After considering options, I decided the safest place would be my parents' suburban home in Glenview. They had a spacious garage, a quiet neighborhood, and despite our complicated relationship, I trusted them to at least provide safe storage. That Thursday evening, I drove the 40 minutes to their house. Dad was mowing when I pulled up and stopped to admire the Corvette. Still a beauty, he said, running his hand along the hood. Your grandfather would be proud. Mom appeared at the door. Vanessa, what a surprise. Staying for dinner. I explained about Tokyo and my request. Of course. Dad said immediately. Plenty of room since Heather took her things to her new apartment. That's wonderful news about your trip, Mom added, though I could tell she didn't grasp the significance. But 3 weeks is so long. Will your boss be upset if you come home for the weekend? I explained international business didn't work that way, and eventually she seemed to understand. As Dad helped me move the Corvette into the garage, I gave him detailed instructions. It needs to be started once a week. Run for 15 minutes, but please don't drive it. The insurance is complicated. And be sure to use this specific cover, I said, showing him the custom-fitted one I'd brought. And whatever you do, don't let anyone else touch it. Vanessa, I know how to take care of a car, Dad said, slightly offended. I'll treat it like it's made of gold. I know, Dad. I just worry. This car means everything to me. That night at dinner, Heather joined us. She'd recently graduated and was working as an admin assistant, her first real job. Throughout dinner, she talked about how stressful work was and how desperately she needed a vacation. All my friends are planning this amazing Mediterranean cruise, she sighed dramatically. But I just can't afford it on my salary. Life is so unfair. I bit my tongue, remembering how I'd worked multiple jobs throughout college without complaint. Mom, predictably, made sympathetic noises and suggested Dad might help with the cost. We'll see, Dad said noncommittally. Money's tight with the kitchen renovation. Before leaving, I called James to finalize our car security plan. We discussed him swapping our cars as an extra precaution, since his replica Stingray looked nearly identical but was worth significantly less. I'll come by your parents' place tomorrow and make the switch, he confirmed. I'll take good care of your baby, and they'll never know the difference. You're the best, I told him. I'll call you when I land in Tokyo. The next morning I boarded my flight, feeling confident my car was in good hands. Little did I know that my careful planning would set in motion a chain of events that would forever change my family dynamics. During my 3 weeks in Tokyo, I called home regularly. Mom and Dad always assured me everything was fine. Though in the final days of my trip, Mom's messages became somewhat cryptic. We have a big surprise for when you get home, she texted, which I assumed meant a welcome home dinner or something innocuous. The Tokyo presentation was a resounding success. The Patterson executives were impressed, and by the end of the second week, they'd signed a contract worth $12 million. At the celebratory dinner on my final night, Veronica hinted strongly at a promotion waiting for me. Vice President has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? She said with a knowing smile. I boarded my return flight, feeling on top of the world. I couldn't wait to get home, take my Corvette for a long drive, and share my good news. The 13-hour flight gave me plenty of time to daydream about my homecoming. If only I had known what was waiting for me. My plane landed at O'Hare at 2:15 p.m. on a sunny Tuesday. After customs, I hailed a taxi directly to my parents' house. I was exhausted but energized by the thought of seeing my beloved Corvette again. Just another 10 minutes, I texted James, who'd promised to meet me there to swap our cars back. As the taxi turned onto my parents' street, I felt a flutter of excitement. The driver pulled into the driveway and I frowned. Something was wrong. The garage door was open, revealing Dad's sedan and Mom's SUV, but no sign of a Corvette. Maybe they moved it, I muttered to myself as I paid the driver and wheeled my suitcase to the front door. Mom opened the door, greeting me with a hug I half-heartedly returned, my mind still on the missing car. "Welcome home, sweetheart. How was your flight?" "Fine," I said distractedly. "Mom, where's my car?" A strange expression flickered across her face. A mixture of defensiveness and something else I couldn't quite identify. She ushered me inside without answering. Dad was in his recliner reading the newspaper. He looked up, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Dad, where's my Corvette?" I asked directly, a knot forming in my stomach. He cleared his throat and glanced at Mom, who had busied herself arranging cookies on a plate, as if this were a normal homecoming. "Well, honey," he began, his voice unnaturally high. "Something came up while you were gone." The knot in my stomach tightened. What does that mean? Where is my car? Mom turned, her chin lifting in that way it always did when she was preparing to defend an indefensible position. "Heather needed some help," she said firmly. "A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." I stared at her, uncomprehending. "What does that have to do with my car?" "Thanks to your car, our daughter is having the time of her life," Mom said with a smile that looked more like a sneer. She pulled out her phone and showed me Heather's Instagram feed. There was my sister, posing on a cruise ship in the Mediterranean, cocktail in hand, designer sunglasses perched on her nose, without a care in the world. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. "You sold my car." The words came out as a whisper, too shocked to even shout. "Now, Vanessa," Dad began in his placating tone, "try to understand. Heather was going through a really rough time at work. All her friends were going on this cruise, and she was going to be left out. It would have been devastating for her. So you sold my car?" This time I did shout, my voice rising with disbelief. "You can always buy another car," Mom said dismissively. "You make good money." Heather needed this opportunity. She needed to network with the right people, make connections for her career. I felt like I was in some bizarre nightmare. My hands began to shake as the full impact hit me. That car was registered in my name. You had no legal right to sell it. My parents exchanged a glance. "Well, technically," Dad mumbled. "We told the buyer you were selling it and had authorized us to handle the transaction." My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples. The room seemed to spin slightly as I tried to process what they had done. "Do you have any idea what that car meant to me?" My voice cracked. It wasn't just transportation. It was a connection to Grandpa. It was the result of 5 years of sacrifice. "It's just a car, Vanessa," Mom said, her tone hardening. "Family is what matters. Heather is your sister. And I don't matter? My feelings, my property, my boundaries? None of that counts." "Don't be so dramatic," Mom scoffed. "You've always been so materialistic, so focused on things. Heather is struggling with depression. The cruise was therapeutic for her." "Depression?" I echoed incredulously. "Since when?" "She's been very stressed at work," Dad offered weakly. "Her boss is demanding." I laughed, a harsh sound with no humor. "Welcome to adult life. I worked 70-hour weeks for 5 years to afford that car. Did you ever once consider selling your possessions to make my life easier?" "That's different," Mom said, growing defensive. "You've always been the strong one. Heather is sensitive. She needs more support." The double standard was so blatant it took my breath away. For a moment I just stood there, trembling with rage and disbelief. Then a thought occurred to me. "How much did you sell it for?" I demanded. More uncomfortable glances between my parents. Finally, Dad answered. $50,000? I gasped. $50,000. That car was worth $85,000. Did you do any research at all before selling it? The buyer said that was a fair price, Dad muttered. We needed to move quickly before you came home. That statement, so naked in its betrayal, hit me like a physical blow. They had deliberately rushed the sale to present me with a fait accompli. They had known exactly what they were doing. Who did you sell it to? I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. Some collector from Indiana, Mom said vaguely. I don't remember his name. My phone buzzed with a text. It was James, just pulled up. Where's the stingray? And suddenly, in the midst of my anger and heartbreak, a realization dawned on me. A realization that would change everything. The text from James triggered something in my brain, a memory that had been pushed aside in the shock of discovering my parents' betrayal. I started to laugh softly at first, then louder. The sound was strange, even to my own ears. A release of tension rather than an expression of joy. My mother's face contorted with confusion and annoyance. What is so funny about your sister's happiness? She demanded. I took a deep breath, trying to collect myself. You know what's funny, Mom? You stole and sold a car that was not mine. Dad frowned. What are you talking about? We saw you drive it here. I held up a finger, signaling them to wait, and stepped outside to greet James, who was now standing in the driveway, looking confused. After a brief exchange, he followed me back inside, equally curious to hear my explanation. Mom, Dad, you remember James, right? I gestured to my boyfriend, who nodded tersely at my parents, his expression guarded. Of course, Mom said impatiently. Vanessa, what do you mean the car was not yours? I smiled, feeling a strange calm settle over me. The car you sold was not my 1969 Corvette Stingray. It was James's replica. The color drained from both my parents' faces as I explained the car-swapping arrangement James and I had made for security purposes. The day after I left for Tokyo, James had come by as planned and swapped his replica Stingray for my authentic one. To the untrained eye, they looked identical. But James's car was worth about $30,000, not $85,000. So you see, I concluded, you didn't sell my car. My car has been safely stored in James's climate-controlled garage for the past 3 weeks. What you sold was James's car without his knowledge or consent. But, my father stammered, it looked exactly like yours. That was the point, James said, speaking for the first time. They're supposed to look the same from the outside. But mine is a replica, built in 2004 to look like a '69 Stingray. Vanessa's is an authentic classic, worth nearly 3 times as much. Oh my God, my mother whispered, sinking into a chair. What have we done? You've committed fraud, I said flatly. You sold property that did not belong to you or to me. You forged documents. You lied to a buyer. We could go to jail. Dad's face was ashen. Yes, James agreed, his voice hard. You could. Auto theft over $20,000 is a Class 1 felony in Illinois. Add wire fraud if you received an electronic payment. Each charge carries up to 15 years. Mom began to cry, loud, dramatic sobs that once might have manipulated me into comforting her. Not today. How were we supposed to know it wasn't your car? She wailed. You tricked us. I didn't trick you, I corrected her. I trusted James to protect my property because I knew on some level that my own family couldn't be trusted. Clearly I was right. You have to help us fix this, Dad pleaded, looking suddenly older than his 60 years. We can't go to jail. We didn't know. Ignorance is not a legal defense, James pointed out. And neither is family loyalty. You sold my car without permission. That is theft. Plain and simple. My phone buzzed again, this time with a call from an unknown number. I answered hesitantly. Is this Vanessa Miller? A male voice asked. Yes. Who is calling? This is Peter Donovan. I recently purchased a 1969 Corvette Stingray from your parents on your behalf. There seems to be a problem with the title transfer. My eyes locked with my parents, who were watching me with naked fear. In that moment I had a choice. I could throw them under the bus, immediately tell this stranger the truth about their theft and fraud. Or I could buy some time to figure out a solution that would deliver justice without destroying my family completely. Mr. Donovan, I said carefully, there has indeed been a misunderstanding. Could I call you back within the hour? I need to discuss some details with my parents. He agreed and I hung up, turning back to the anxious faces watching me. That was your buyer, I informed them. He's having trouble with the title transfer. Probably because the car is registered to James, not to me. So now we have a decision to make. Please, Vanessa, Mom begged, her makeup streaked with tears. Please help us. We never meant to hurt anyone. Except me, I pointed out. You were perfectly fine hurting me. We thought you would understand, Dad said weakly. Family helps family. Is that right? I asked, my voice laced with sarcasm. Then I guess it's time for you to help James, since you were the ones who stole from him. My parents looked at James with new fear in their eyes, suddenly realizing that their fate rested not just in my hands, but in his as well. What do you want us to do? Dad asked him directly. James crossed his arms, his expression severe. First, I want to know exactly who has my car and how much they paid. Then we can start figuring out how to make this right. As my parents fumbled to find the buyer's information, I stepped outside with James to have a private conversation. Standing in the driveway where my Corvette should have been, we spoke in hushed tones about our options. I can't believe they did this, he said, shaking his head. Your own parents. Believe it, I said grimly. They've always favored Heather. I just never thought they'd go this far. Do you want to press charges? We could. We would win. I sighed deeply. I don't want my parents to go to jail, but I don't want them to get away with this either. They need to understand there are consequences. James nodded, taking my hand. We'll figure it out together. When we returned inside, my parents were huddled over Dad's phone. They'd found the buyer's contact information and purchase agreement. The reality of their situation was clearly sinking in, their faces drawn with worry. We found everything, Dad said, holding out a folder with trembling hands. All the paperwork from the sale. I took the folder without comment and began reviewing the documents with James. The situation was even worse than I had thought. Not only had they forged my signature on multiple documents, but they had also created a fake bill of sale with an incorrect VIN number. This is a complete mess, James muttered. They created fraudulent documents that don't even match the car's actual identification. My mother began sobbing again. We don't know anything about cars or VIN numbers. We just wanted to help Heather. Well, congratulations, I said coldly. You've managed to commit multiple felonies, sell a car you didn't own, and potentially ruin your relationship with your daughter. All to send Heather on a cruise she didn't earn and couldn't afford. What are you going to do? Dad asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked at James, then back at my parents. We are going to call Mr. Donovan back, and you are going to tell him exactly what you did. After leaving my parents' house, I drove straight to James's apartment in my actual Corvette Stingray, which had been safely stored in his garage just as planned. The familiar purr of the engine provided little comfort as my mind raced with the implications of what had just happened. James followed in his sedan, and we agreed to meet to discuss our next steps. Sitting in James's living room, the reality of the situation began to sink in. My parents had not only betrayed my trust in the most fundamental way, but had also committed serious crimes that could result in prison time. And somewhere in the Mediterranean, my sister was living it up on a luxury cruise, blissfully unaware of the chaos she had left in her wake. I still can't believe they did this, I said for perhaps the 10th time, pacing back and forth across James's hardwood floor. Who sells someone else's car? James sat on the couch, his expression a mixture of anger and concern. People who think they're entitled to whatever they want, he answered. Your parents clearly don't respect boundaries. That's the understatement of the century. I collapsed beside him. The worst part is they genuinely don't seem to understand why what they did was wrong. They keep talking about family and helping Heather, as if that justifies theft and fraud. What do you want to do about the buyer, this Donovan guy? James asked. He's probably the innocent party in all this. I nodded. We need to call him back. I think we should be honest about what happened, but frame it as a misunderstanding rather than outright fraud. At least until we figure out our next move. Just as we were discussing this, my phone exploded with notifications. My parents had been calling and texting nonstop since we left. I ignored most, but one caught my attention. A text from my mother saying, "Your Aunt Sylvia thinks you are being selfish and ungrateful." Oh, great, I groaned, showing James the message. They're already rallying the family against me. Sure enough, within the hour, my phone rang with a call from my mother's sister, Aunt Sylvia. Vanessa Marie, she began without preamble, using my first and middle name, as she always did when she was about to lecture me. What is this I hear about you threatening to send your parents to jail over a car after everything they've done for you? I took a deep breath. Aunt Sylvia, with all due respect, you don't have the full story. I know enough. Your mother is absolutely distraught. They were only trying to help your sister, and now you're talking about pressing charges? What kind of daughter does that? The kind whose parents stole property worth $30,000, I replied evenly. And not even my property but my boyfriend's. They committed multiple felonies, Aunt Sylvia. This isn't about being ungrateful. She scoffed. Family helps family, Vanessa Marie. You've always been so independent, so unwilling to bend. Would it really have hurt you to let your sister have this one thing? The conversation continued in this vein for several minutes, with my aunt firmly on my parents' side and seemingly unable to grasp the severity of what they had done. By the time I hung up, I was fuming. Family helps family. I mimicked bitterly to James. Apparently, that only applies when I'm the one expected to give something up. James squeezed my hand. Not everyone will see it that way. Have you talked to your grandfather's brother, Uncle George? You always said he was more reasonable. Uncle George had been close to my grandfather and had always had a soft spot for me. When I called him and explained the situation, his reaction was entirely different from Aunt Sylvia's. They did what? He exclaimed. Sold James's car without permission? That's not just wrong, Vanessa. That's criminal. You have every right to be upset. His support meant more to me than I could express. Everyone else seems to think I should just forgive and forget because they're family. Family doesn't mean you get to break the law, Uncle George said firmly, or that you get to trample all over someone's boundaries. Your grandfather would be appalled. After hanging up with Uncle George, I felt marginally better, but the emotional exhaustion of the day was catching up with me. James suggested we order takeout and try to relax for the evening, postponing any major decisions until the next day. As we sat eating Thai food straight from the containers, James looked at me thoughtfully. Can I ask you something? Of course. If they had actually sold your real Corvette, what would you have done? I set down my fork, considering the question. Honestly, I probably would have pressed charges immediately. That car is irreplaceable to me. It's my connection to my grandfather, the result of years of hard work and sacrifice. I don't think I could have forgiven them for that. And now it's complicated. They still committed a crime, but against you, not me. And while what they did was terrible, I don't know if I want them to go to jail. They're still my parents, despite everything. James nodded slowly. I understand. And for what it's worth, I don't want your parents in prison either. But they do need to make this right. And they need to understand that there are serious consequences for what they did. We stayed up late into the night discussing our options and trying to figure out the best path forward. Eventually, we decided to consult with a lawyer friend before making any final decisions. Sleep did not come easily that night. I tossed and turned, my mind replaying the events of the day and wrestling with conflicting emotions. On one hand, I was furious with my parents and wanted them to face consequences. On the other, the thought of them in prison made me physically ill. Morning came too soon, and with it a new crisis. My parents showed up at my apartment unannounced, looking haggard and desperate. Vanessa, please, my mother begged when I reluctantly let them in. You have to help us. We can't sleep. We can't eat. We're terrified. You should have thought about the consequences before selling a car that didn't belong to you, I said, unmoved by their distress. We know we made a terrible mistake, Dad said, his voice breaking. We will do anything to make it right. Anything. I looked at their anxious faces, feeling a complex mixture of anger, pity, and exhaustion. It's not that simple. What you did was not just wrong. It was illegal, and it's not just up to me. The car you sold belonged to James, not to me. We'll pay him back, Mom said quickly. Every penny. And where will you get $30,000? I asked skeptically. You just told me money was tight with the kitchen renovation. They exchanged a glance. We'll figure it out, Dad said. Take out a home equity loan if we have to. Whatever it takes. I sighed heavily. Look, we're meeting with the lawyer friend this afternoon to discuss options. Until then, I don't have anything else to say to you. Please, Vanessa, Mom pleaded. At least tell us you won't press charges. We can't go to jail. We just cannot. That is not a promise I can make right now, I said firmly. You need to leave. I will call you after we speak with the lawyer. As I closed the door behind them, I leaned against it, suddenly exhausted despite the early hour. Whatever happened next, I knew that my relationship with my parents would never be the same again. At 2 p.m., James and I sat in the sleek downtown office of Alicia Ramirez, a lawyer friend who specialized in criminal law. I had met Alicia during a corporate charity event, and we'd kept in touch. When I called her that morning, explaining our situation, she immediately offered to meet. Let me make sure I understand correctly, Alicia said, reviewing her notes. Your parents sold James's car without permission, forged documents including a bill of sale with your signature, provided an incorrect VIN to the buyer, and used the proceeds to fund your sister's vacation. Is that accurate? Yes, I confirmed. That sums it up. Alicia leaned back in her chair, her expression grave. I won't sugarcoat this. What they did constitutes grand theft auto and wire fraud at minimum. Each charge carries up to 15 years in prison. Given their age and lack of prior criminal history, they might get a more lenient sentence. But prison time is certainly on the table if charges are pressed. James and I exchanged concerned looks. Despite my anger, the thought of my parents in prison was difficult to contemplate. What are our options? I asked. Well, you have several, Alicia explained. 1, you could press criminal charges and let the legal system take its course. 2, you could pursue civil remedies, suing them for the value of the car plus damages. Or 3, you could try to resolve this privately outside the legal system. What would the third option entail? James asked. Essentially, creating a legally binding agreement where your parents make financial restitution and any other terms you deem appropriate. It wouldn't erase the criminal liability, but without a formal complaint, it's unlikely the authorities would pursue the matter. And what about the buyer? I asked. Mr. Donovan is an innocent party in this. He paid for a car that was sold to him fraudulently. Alicia nodded. That complicates things. The cleanest solution would be to unwind the transaction completely, return his money, get the car back. But that means your parents would need to come up with $50,000 immediately. They mentioned taking out a home equity loan, I said. That could work, but you'd need to move quickly. The longer the situation persists, the greater the chance of Mr. Donovan discovering the fraud independently and going to the authorities himself. After discussing more details, James and I left Alicia's office with a clear plan. We would attempt to resolve the situation privately, starting with contacting Mr. Donovan and being honest about what had happened. I think we should meet him in person, James suggested as we walked to our cars. This is not a conversation to have over the phone. I agreed. We called Mr. Donovan to arrange a meeting for the following day at a coffee shop halfway between Chicago and his home in Indianapolis. Next, we turned our attention to tracking down my sister. Heather had been posting daily updates from her Mediterranean cruise, flaunting her luxurious vacation, while remaining completely oblivious to the chaos she had left behind. After multiple attempts, I finally reached her via the cruise ship's satellite phone. Vanessa, she answered, the sounds of music and laughter in the background. Why are you calling? Is something wrong? Yes, Heather. Something is very wrong, I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. Mom and Dad sold a car to pay for your cruise. A car that did not belong to them. There was a pause. Then Heather laughed. Oh, is that all? I thought someone was sick or something. Look, I know you're probably upset they sold your precious car, but you can always buy another one. It's not like you can't afford it. Her dismissive attitude made my blood boil. It was not my car they sold, Heather. It was James's car. What they did was illegal. They could go to jail. That finally got her attention. Jail? Don't be ridiculous. They were just trying to help me. By committing fraud? By stealing? Those are crimes, Heather. Serious ones. So what are you saying? Her voice had lost its carefree tone, replaced by growing concern. I'm saying you need to come home. Now, your Mediterranean adventure is over. But the cruise doesn't end for another week. Then get off at the next port and fly home, I said firmly. This is not optional, Heather. You need to be part of fixing the mess you helped create. I didn't create any mess. I didn't ask them to sell a car. Didn't you? Because Mom says you were talking about how desperately you needed this cruise, how depressed you were about missing it. There was a telling silence on the other end of the line. That's what I thought, I said. Get home, Heather. I'll text you the details of what's happening, and you had better be prepared to contribute to the repayment plan. The next day, James and I met with Peter Donovan, a middle-aged classic car enthusiast who had purchased James's replica Corvette. He was understandably upset when we explained the situation. So let me get this straight, he said, his face reddening. I bought a stolen car with forged documents? Technically, yes, I admitted. Though my parents would argue they thought they had permission to sell it. That's not how permission works, Mr. Donovan said angrily. I spent $50,000 on that car. I've already registered it in my name, added it to my insurance. This is a mess. We understand, James said calmly. And we want to make it right. We are prepared to offer you a full refund of the $50,000, plus an additional $5,000 for the inconvenience and any expenses you've incurred. Mr. Donovan seemed slightly mollified by this offer. And what about the car? We would need it returned, of course, I explained. It legally belongs to James. After some negotiation, Mr. Donovan agreed to our terms, with the condition that the money be wired to his account before he released the car. Now, we just needed my parents to come up with $55,000. When we presented this solution to my parents, they were simultaneously relieved and horrified. $55,000? My mother repeated aghast. Where are we supposed to get that kind of money? You mentioned a home equity loan. I reminded them. Or you could sell some of your investments. This is not my problem to solve, Mom. You created this situation. But we don't have that much equity in the house, Dad protested. The market has been down, and with the kitchen renovation costs. Then I suggest you start looking at other options, James said firmly. Because right now, this is the only thing standing between you and potential criminal charges. We could maybe come up with $40,000, Dad offered after a hushed conversation with Mom, but not $55,000. James shook his head. Not good enough. The full amount needs to be repaid plus compensation for my time and stress. If you can't come up with it, perhaps Heather should contribute, since she benefited from the theft. Heather? Mom looked shocked at the suggestion. But she's just starting her career. She barely makes enough to cover her rent. Then she shouldn't be taking Mediterranean cruises, should she? I pointed out. Actions have consequences, Mom. For everyone, not just for me. It took 2 more days of tense negotiations, but eventually a plan was formed. My parents would take out a home equity loan for $40,000. Heather, who had reluctantly returned from her cruise early, would contribute $10,000 from her savings, which I suspected had been largely funded by my parents over the years, and they would sell my mother's expensive jewelry collection to cover the remaining $5,000. James insisted on one additional condition, a formal written apology, acknowledging what they had done and promising never to touch or make decisions about our property again. This would be signed and notarized, providing an additional layer of protection should anything similar happen in the future. My parents balked at this last requirement. An apology is one thing, Mom said, but a notarized document seems extreme. Not as extreme as prison, James countered. This is non-negotiable. With no other options, they eventually agreed to all our terms. Alicia drew up the necessary paperwork, including a settlement agreement that specified the financial restitution and a timeline for payment. The most difficult part of the process was the family meeting we held at my apartment. Heather, now forced to face the consequences, alternated between defensive anger and tearful self-pity. Why am I being punished? She demanded. I didn't sell the car. No, you just manipulated Mom and Dad into funding a luxury vacation you couldn't afford, I replied. You are 24 years old, Heather, an adult. It's time you started acting like one. That's not fair. You've always been jealous of me because Mom and Dad love me more. The room fell silent at her outburst. Even our parents looked shocked. Is that what you think? I asked quietly. That they love you more? Well, they've always given me more, she said, her voice smaller now. They've always protected me, made things easier for me. And look how that has turned out, I said, not unkindly. You're 24 and you can't support yourself. You manipulate them into bailing you out whenever life gets hard. That is not love, Heather. That is enabling. My mother started to protest, but my father placed a hand on her arm, stopping her. For perhaps the first time, he seemed to be truly listening. Vanessa is right, he said slowly. We haven't done you any favors, Heather. We thought we were protecting you, but we've just kept you from learning how to stand on your own. This unexpected support from my father changed the tenor of the conversation. Over the next several hours, we had the most honest discussion our family had ever experienced. There were tears, recriminations, and painful admissions. But by the end, something had shifted. It was as if a long festering wound had finally been lanced, allowing the beginning of true healing. The following week was a flurry of activity. My parents secured their home equity loan. Heather reluctantly transferred her contribution. My mother sold several pieces of jewelry through a consignment shop. James and I coordinated with Mr. Donovan to complete the car exchange. The day my parents met with James to formally apologize was tense but necessary. My mother, who had always been proud to a fault, struggled to say the words. We are truly sorry, James, my father finally said when it became clear Mom couldn't get the words out. What we did was wrong, illegal, and disrespectful. We betrayed your trust and Vanessa's. We have no excuse. James accepted their apology with grace, though I knew it would take time for him to fully forgive them. The notarized document was signed. The money was transferred to Mr. Donovan, and James's car was returned, thankfully undamaged. As we drove away from the lawyer's office, James's replica Corvette following behind us, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The situation was far from perfectly resolved, and the emotional fallout would continue, but the immediate crisis had been averted. Thank you, I said to James, reaching for his hand across the console, for being so understanding through all of this. He squeezed my hand. That's what partners do. We face challenges together. Looking in my rearview mirror at the familiar red Corvette, now safely back in James's possession, I allowed myself to hope that perhaps some good could come from this painful experience. 1 month after the car crisis, I found myself sitting at my parents' dining room table for a family dinner. The atmosphere was different. A mixture of cautious optimism and lingering tension that reflected our new reality. Dad placed a platter of grilled chicken on the table, his hands bearing calluses from the weekend construction job he had taken to help repay the home equity loan. Mom followed with a bowl of salad, her once manicured nails now plain and trimmed short. Her diamond rings, noticeably absent, sold to help make restitution. Heather texted she's running 10 minutes late, Mom said, checking her phone. Something about traffic from downtown. My sister had started a new entry-level position at an advertising agency that paid less, but offered better advancement opportunities. To her credit, she hadn't complained once about the early mornings or demanding workload. James sat beside me, invited by my parents as a gesture of reconciliation. He had been hesitant to accept, but I had encouraged him. They need to see us as a unit, I had explained, to understand that hurting you means hurting me. Conversation during dinner was initially stilted, focusing on safe topics like the weather. But gradually, as we relaxed, more meaningful exchanges emerged. I spoke with Uncle George yesterday, Dad mentioned. He's thinking about selling his old pickup truck. Says he's too old to keep maintaining it. That's a shame, I replied. That truck has been in the family forever. Dad nodded, then cleared his throat. I was thinking maybe I could buy it from him. Fix it up. I know it's not a classic Corvette, but... You want to restore a truck? I asked, surprised. Well, I thought maybe if you were interested, we could work on it together. His eyes met mine briefly before darting away, uncharacteristically shy. I know I never showed much interest in your car passion before, but I'd like to learn if you're willing to teach me. The offer touched me deeply. It wasn't just about the truck. It was Dad making an effort to connect with me on my terms, to understand something that mattered to me. I'd like that, I said sincerely. Mom watched this exchange with a small smile. Over the past month, she had been making her own efforts to change. The family therapy sessions we had been attending weekly had helped her recognize her pattern of boundary violations and favoritism. "I made something for you, James," she said, retrieving a gift bag. "Just a small token." James accepted the bag with polite curiosity, pulling out a framed document. It was the title to his replica Corvette, along with a handwritten note promising never to interfere with his or my property again. "I had it professionally framed," Mom explained, "as a reminder to myself as much as a gift to you. Boundaries matter. I'm still learning that." "Thank you, Diana," James said, using my mother's first name as she had recently invited him to do. "I appreciate the gesture." The front door opened and Heather hurried in, slightly breathless. "Sorry I'm late. The client meeting ran long, and then traffic was a nightmare." She hung up her coat and joined us, looking more mature somehow in her business attire. Her previously highlighted hair, now its natural brown. The most striking change, however, was in her demeanor. Gone was the entitlement that had characterized her interactions before. In its place was a newfound awareness of others and her impact on them. "How was your day, Vanessa?" she asked after greeting everyone. Before the car incident, she rarely showed interest in my life. "Good," I replied. "Busy. The Patterson account is demanding, but it's coming together." "That's the one in Tokyo, right? The one that got you the promotion?" I nodded, surprised she had remembered that detail. "Vice President of International Accounts," I confirmed, still getting used to the title. "That's really impressive," she said. And for once, there was no undercurrent of competition or resentment in her voice. Just genuine pride. As dinner progressed, I found myself observing my family with new eyes. The changes were subtle but significant. Dad asking permission before serving more food onto Mom's plate. Mom catching herself before speaking for Heather. Heather offering to help with dishes without being prompted. These were small things, perhaps inconsequential to an outsider, but to me they represented a fundamental shift in our family dynamics. The painful experience we had endured had forced us to confront long-established patterns of behavior that had damaged our relationships. After dessert, as James and I prepared to leave, my mother pulled me aside in the hallway. "I know I've said this before," she began, her voice low and serious, "but I am truly sorry, Vanessa. Not just for the car incident, but for all the times I dismissed your feelings, your passions, your boundaries. I always thought I was being a good mother by treating you and Heather differently, by pushing you to be strong and protecting her from challenges. I see now how unfair that was to both of you." I studied her face, noting the genuine remorse in her eyes. "Thank you for saying that, Mom. It means a lot." "Do you think you'll ever be able to fully forgive us?" she asked hesitantly. I considered the question carefully. "I think forgiveness is a process, not a single moment. I'm working on it, and seeing you all make real changes helps." She nodded, accepting this incomplete but honest answer. As James and I drove home in my Corvette, the familiar rumble of the engine was comforting. The car had taken on new meaning for me now. It was still my connection to my grandfather, still the symbol of my hard work and persistence, but it had also become a catalyst for necessary change in my family, a painful but ultimately healing confrontation with long-buried issues. "Penny, for your thoughts?" James asked, noticing my contemplative mood. "I was just thinking about how sometimes the things we value most can become tests of character," I replied. This car revealed truths about my family that were hard to face, but maybe needed to be faced. "Do you regret any of it? The way we handled things?" I shook my head. "No. It would have been easier to just let them off the hook completely to avoid the conflict, but that would have just reinforced the same unhealthy patterns. They needed to experience real consequences, and I needed to stand firm in my boundaries." "I think you found a good balance," James said. "Holding them accountable without cutting them off completely. That takes strength." "And support," I added, squeezing his hand. "I couldn't have done it without you." The next morning, I took the Corvette for a long drive along Lake Michigan, something I had done countless times before. But today felt different. As the wind rushed through my hair and the sun glinted off the car's polished hood, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. The car was still just a car, an object of metal and rubber and glass, but what it represented had evolved. Now it symbolized not just my connection to the past, but my commitment to my own worth. My refusal to be diminished or disregarded, even by those who claim to love me. Perhaps the most valuable lesson from this entire ordeal was learning that standing up for yourself doesn't mean abandoning those you love. It means loving them enough to establish boundaries that allow for mutual respect and growth. It means finding the strength to say, "This is not acceptable," while still leaving room for reconciliation. As I pulled back into my apartment complex, I thought about the journey our family had embarked on. The therapy sessions, the difficult conversations, the small daily choices to do better. None of it was easy, but all of it was necessary. The road ahead would not be perfectly smooth. Old habits die hard, and there would inevitably be setbacks and disagreements. But for perhaps the first time in my adult life, I felt hopeful about my family's future, confident that we were moving in the right direction, and that, more than any car or possession, was truly priceless. So I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who crossed your boundaries? How did you balance holding them accountable while maintaining the relationship? Tell me what you think. I really want to know your experiences in the comments below.